So friends, remember the John Durham investigation? That's the one where Bill Barr appointed this guy, John Durham, as a special counsel to investigate the investigators who investigated Donald Trump. Well, the New York Times just pulled back the curtain on the Durham investigation, and what we see behind that curtain is ugly. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, there's some great reporting out by the New York Times, specifically by investigative journalists Katie Benner, Adam Goldman, and Charlie Savage about the John Durham investigation. You recall the one. Donald Trump was really angry about the Bob Mueller investigation into the coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians, an investigation that revealed more than 140 contacts between Trump campaign officials and Russians, an investigation that meticulously detailed and documented multiple counts of obstruction of justice by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump didn't like it one bit. So what did he do? He convinced his then Attorney General Bill Barr to appoint a special counsel to investigate the investigators that had investigated him and documented all that dirt. Specifically, Bill Barr's mandate was to try to undermine the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation. Well, now the New York Times has pulled the curtain back on the John Durham investigation of the investigators, and boy, it's ugly behind that curtain. Here is some of that new reporting by the New York Times. Headline: How Barr's quest to find flaws in the Russia inquiry unraveled. The review by John Durham at one point veered into a criminal investigation related to Donald Trump himself, even as it failed to find wrongdoing in the origins of the Russia inquiry. And that article begins: It became a regular litany of grievances from President Donald Trump and his supporters. The investigation into his 2016 campaign's ties to Russia was a witch hunt, they maintained, that had been opened without any solid basis, went on too long, and found no proof of collusion. Egged on by Mr. Trump, Attorney General William Barr set out in 2019 to dig into their shared theory that the Russia investigation likely stemmed from a conspiracy by intelligence or law enforcement agencies. To lead the inquiry, Mr. Barr turned to a hard-nosed prosecutor named John Durham and later granted him special counsel status to carry on after Mr. Trump left office. But after almost 4 years, far longer than the Russia investigation itself, Mr. Durham's work is coming to an end without uncovering anything like the deep state plot alleged by Mr. Trump and suspected by Mr. Barr. Mr. Trump would repeatedly portray the Mueller report as having found no collusion with Russia. The reality was more complex. In fact, the report detailed numerous links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Indeed, I think it documented more than 140 contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians. And it established both how Moscow had helped to work Mr. Trump win and how his campaign had expected to benefit from the foreign interference. Plus, as I mentioned, the Mueller report documented multiple instances where Donald Trump obstructed justice. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole parade of horribles cataloged in the New York Times article. It's a lengthy piece, and I urge you to read it for yourself. But there are a few things that jump out, like several prosecutors, senior prosecutors on John Durham's team resigned, quit, left the investigation because of concerns they had about the ethics of the investigation that was being conducted by Durham. One of the prosecutors who quit was a longtime colleague of mine at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. His name is Anthony Scarpelli, and I will take Mr. Scarpelli's ethics to the bank every day of the week, and he quit rather than follow what John Durham wanted to do. The article also talked about a former federal prosecutor who left the Department of Justice and became a defense attorney, and he was representing some of the witnesses in the Durham probe, and he said what he saw of the conduct of John Durham, quote, made his head spin. Then the article talked about how the Department of Justice Inspector General had conducted a full investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation and found it was properly opened. So what does Bill Barr do? He tries to undermine the results, the conclusion of the Department of Justice Inspector General's investigation. Why? Because it didn't comport with where he wanted things to go, and more importantly, where Donald Trump wanted things to go. I'm not going to continue to catalog the entire parade of horribles laid out in the New York Times article, but friends, I want to focus on one horrible in particular. And in the New York Times piece, you can find it under the heading of an awkward tip. Let me set it up. Bill Barr and John Durham were globe-trotting, asking foreign officials if, they had any dirt about the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, that would comport with the narrative they were looking for. And here is what the article relates in the section titled An Awkward Tip. On one of Mr. Barr and Mr. Durham's trips to Europe, according to people familiar with the matter, Italian officials, while denying any role in setting off the Russia investigation, unexpectedly offered a potentially explosive tip linking Mr. Trump to certain suspected financial crimes. Mr. Barr and Mr. Durham decided that the tip was too serious and credible to ignore. But rather than assign it to another prosecutor, which is what should have been done, Mr. Barr had Mr. Durham investigate the matter himself, giving him criminal prosecution powers for the first time, even though the possible wrongdoing by Mr. Trump did not fall squarely within Mr. Durham's assignment to scrutinize the origins of the Russia inquiry, the people said. Mr. Durham, after investigating something he should not have been investigating, Mr. Durham never filed charges. And it remains unclear what level of an investigation it was, what steps he took, what he learned, and whether anyone at the White House ever found out. The extraordinary fact that Mr. Durham opened a criminal investigation that included scrutinizing Mr. Trump has remained secret until it was unearthed by those investigative reporters. Let me name them again: Katie Benner, Adam Goldman, and Charlie Savage of the New York Times. But let me just recap that, friends. So Durham had a mandate to investigate the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation. That was his jurisdiction, that was his authority. And Barr and Durham together went globe-trotting, looking for the kind of evidence and information that would support their narrative, that would give Mr. Trump what he wanted, evidence that the Trump-Russia investigation never should have been opened in the first place. There was no such evidence because it was properly opened, and it bore fruit. While they were globe-trotting, meeting with Italian government officials, those government officials said, "I can't help you on the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, but we do have evidence of financial crimes by Donald Trump. At that point, what should have happened was a prosecutor, not Mr. Durham, who had a narrow jurisdictional mandate about what he was supposed to be investigating. Another DOJ prosecutor or team should have been assigned to follow up on the information, the awkward tip presented by the Italian government officials. That's not what Bill Barr did. No, he said to John Durham, why don't you just look into this one yourself? And it was serious, they said. They even opened a criminal investigation into this allegation of financial crimes by Donald Trump. And then it got buried. We know nothing about it. We don't know whether charges should have been brought but were killed by some combination of Durham and Bill Barr. We have no idea what happened. We do know that wasn't John Durham's to investigate in the first place, given his jurisdictional mandate, what he was supposed to be looking at. The whole thing stinks, to use a legal term, friends. So I suspect this is just one of the first big old shoes to drop about what was going on in this Durham investigation. Let me finish with this, though, friends. What we do know is that when this whole attempt to undermine the Trump-Russia investigation failed, what did Durham do? Well, then he kind of shifted focus over to the Hillary Clinton campaign. Yeah, maybe they were the ones who were, putting disinformation in the mix about Donald Trump. Maybe they were the ones that we should investigate. And remember, when Durham went down that second path, he actually brought charges against not one but two people. And he took those people to trial, and he failed miserably. In fact, some of the prosecutors walked off the investigation because they didn't even believe those cases should be brought to trial. To say the Durham debacle was an embarrassment, a fiasco from start to finish is an understatement. It looks like it was worse than a debacle, worse than a fiasco. Friends, when I was a federal prosecutor, if somebody had assigned me an investigation and I put a team together and I investigated that case that was assigned to me as well, as exhaustively, as aggressively, as honorably, as ethically as I possibly could, and I came to a conclusion. And after I came to that conclusion, I had somebody from the Trump administration say, you know what, Glenn? Now we're going to investigate you for conducting that investigation. Make no mistake about it, that is what Donald Trump and Bill Barr and John Durham did. To say that's a recipe for governmental and investigative disaster is a gross understatement. It feels like the whole concept of justice was nowhere near what Trump and Barr and Durham did. And justice matters. And friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.